Seinfeld is a 1990s situational comedy centered around the life of stand-up comedian Jerome Seinfeld. Jerome, perhaps now better known for masterminding the B-movie and saying nothing other than "What's the deal?", was kind of a big deal in the 90s as the titular character of the show he created with Larry David. The show was, and remains, very popular, and despite it being over 30 years old, holds up quite well in this viewer's opinion. Part of its well-aged shtick is the focus and strength of the individual characters, a general lack of continuity between episodes allowing for easy casual viewing, and relying on the fundamental awkwardness of human interaction to create some tension and release. Described and meta-superimposed into the show itself as a show about nothing, the storylines here are deeply unserious, lacking real drama, and you feel that the characters might just go on mucking about their lives and making mistakes forever if time never passed and the meat never fell off their bones. I could see some people finding the lack of progress or change frustrating or dull, but generally speaking, I quite enjoy it. Larry and Jerry had a very good thing going. The sense of humour that the Feld celebrates includes irony, a touch of slapstick, absurdism, and what I feel is overall an optimistic view of the world in a trench coat and a fedora. I'd like to hone in on one of the more absurdist elements of the show, which is its growing tendency to use comedic timing at the end of episodes as the credits play. In the early seasons, the credits typically roll over Jerry doing some stand-up in a club, usually some bits relevant to whatever they're doing or talking about in that episode. Admittedly, these stand-up bits have aged relatively poorly, but that's mostly just because observational comedy has kind of had its heyday, and stand-up comedy has generally moved on. It's not that it's abysmal or anything like that, but I doubt it hits like it did in the 80s and 90s. Anyway, as the show progresses, the stand-up bits become less common, and instead we learn that the show has ended by the glorious words, "Executive producer Larry David appearing on screen with a freeze frame." Pretty standard stuff, ultimately. But leaning into that love of slapstick and absurdity, they decided to make the most of these end screens with a nice bit of comedic timing. They'll freeze the shot over something horrible happening to the main characters, an extremely awkward situation, Kramer doing something absolutely garish, or just the end of a punchline that they spent the entire 20-minute runtime setting up. And of course, these free frames are accompanied by Jonathan Wolf's ridiculously bouncy slap bass line that became a joke in and of itself. If you don't believe me, watch an episode of season 1 or 2 and listen for the bass, and then jump up to season 5 or 6. You'll notice that they jacked the bass way up in the mix, largely for comedic effect. Anyway, back to the freeze frames and Larry David's name. I've come to appreciate this freeze frame slapstick bit quite a lot over time, and it sends me roaring with laughter much more than I might have thought through the course of a still good episode. It feels like a maximalist approach to the humour, leaving no stone unturned, no hard edge unpolished, no opportunity missed. Like they sat down and said, how do we make the transition to the credits funnier, and then absolutely nailed it. Now, obviously not all of the freeze frames are funny or even intended to be funny, and some of the ones that are don't hit that hard. You can't do everything perfectly, that's just the law of averages. But still, the end screens just add so much to the show when they do time them perfectly, and have them linked to the final punchline of the show in an artistic way. Take the example of the mango. Most of the episode is focused on whether women fake with their partners, including Elaine with Jerry when they were dating. George becomes obsessed with whether his own girlfriend is faking, because he's a proto-incel, and Kramer gets banned from the fresh fruit stall downstairs. In the depths of his obsession, George tries some of the mango that Kramer has been banned from purchasing and experiences a renewed drive, and rushes to his girlfriend's place. Jerry, meanwhile, can't forget about Elaine faking with him and asks for another chance. At the very end, after Jerry fails again to satisfy Elaine and George satisfies his girlfriend, She mentions that she's kind of hungry and if he has any of that mango left, at which point he realizes that the mango is apparently some kind of aphrodisiac. The episode ends with the still of Jerry's face as he has this realization. The timing is comedic, the weaving of the fruit and faking plot lines is dramatic, and the satisfaction as it reaches its own climax is just fantastic. The end screen isn't just a funny transition out of the drama of the episode or another punchline unlinked to the joke, it's vital to the satisfactory conclusion of the episode. Complemented by the lack of episode-to-episode story and continuity, the freeze frame itself serves as a comedic resolution in a way that dialogue would simply not be able to. It also becomes kind of a recurring and notable joke at one point or another, and maybe I can only speak for myself, but once you're 6 seasons in, just slapping Larry David, executive producer, over any old freeze frame could be funny. You could play some footage of some people dropping a casket at a funeral, freeze frame it just before the casket hits the ground and throw the Larry David on top, and it would be hysterical. The freeze frame doesn't just accentuate the bit, it is a bit in and of itself. One other thing about the end screen is that in the days of week-to-week programming, this end screen would have been the last thing that the viewer sees for the week, assuming there's not some of Jerry's stand-up afterwards. You'd have to wait a whole week again to watch the next episode of Seinfeld, with your last memory of last week's episode being the end screen or Jerry's stand-up. In the context of week-to-week viewing, a strong finish is essential to making sure viewers come back for more next week. The end screen serves this purpose wonderfully by its incorporation of punchline into finale. The final release is itself the last frame, leaving the viewer wanting more than they can get. In the context of streaming and on-demand viewing, it serves a similar purpose but with a different result. When I'm watching Seinfeld and the end screen makes me cackle and wallop, I'm much more inclined to immediately watch another episode to dive into another binge. Most streamed shows try to entice this with a cliffhanger or a plot twist of some kind to keep the streaming viewer hooked. But Seinfeld's lack of continuity means this wouldn't really work. It's not that there isn't any continuity, but the plot lines don't really link together in any coherent way from an episode-to-episode basis. Instead, each episode finishing on a high note serves the same purpose. The end screen bit also helps to solidify the frequent lack of resolution in Seinfeld episodes. Where other sitcoms try to tie up all the loose ends after something comes to a head, Seinfeld lets it all hang out, in a way that the sudden cut to the end screen only accentuates. Like I said earlier, Seinfeld has a keen sense of optimism, but only in the sense that it can just laugh at all the awful situations that the characters end up in. Nothing good ever happens to George, period, and that's fantastic. The abrupt finish is a classic Seinfeld move for saying, things have gone terribly wrong, and that's it. I also have to give bonus points to wherever the end screen focuses on Kramer. Kramer is Seinfeld's physical comedy specialist, always smacking into walls, falling over, bursting through the door to applause. Some of the most absurd, the gaudiest, the most awkward end screens are focused on Kramer. The one where he's making out with a mannequin in a car and the arms fall off. The one where he spends too long in a tanning bed and acquires a darker skin tone and then visits a house. The one where he burns down a cabin with a Cuban cigar. Kramer delivers on physical comedy, and Larry David's name and title make sure it hits as hard as it can at the end. That's all I have, folks. Tell me, what are the best Seinfeld end screens in your view? What are the best things that Larry David, executive producer, has been slapped on top of? Let me know in the comments down below, and thanks for watching.